Idle games provide a casual game experience where a player can progress through the game without actively interacting with it. In this first episode of our Unity tutorial series on creating an idle game, you'll learn how to create a scriptable object for all of your items, increment items over time, and toggle between different items to increment. Before you leave, make sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons. It takes 2 seconds, helps the channel a lot, and it's absolutely free. And as always, the link to the code we create in this video is available for download in the description. To speed things along, I've already created some things in my project. I've created a UI canvas that has my inventory. In here, we'll display all of our items and how many items we have for each one. We'll also make this the place where you can select which item will be incremented. By default, we also have a camera in here. In my prefabs folder, I've also created an inventory UI prefab. This will be what displays in our inventory for each item. This inventory UI contains a button, an icon which will display our item's image, and quantity which contains a text mesh pro text element that we'll use to show how many of each item we have. If you need help creating any of these UI or button elements, there's links in the description below to tutorials on how you can do that. The way that we'll work this is that in our inventory, we'll instantiate a prefab for each of our items. For each item, we'll automatically create a button, set the icon, and the quantity. But to do that, we need to make our button, sprite renderer, and quantity text accessible. To do that, I'll click on Inventory, go to Add Component, New Script, and then type in InventoryItem. Then click the Create and Add button. Unity will create my script and place it in the Assets folder by default. I can drag and drop it to my Scripts folder to maintain organization. If I double click Inventory Item here, it'll open my script in Visual Studio. Once Visual Studio is open, we'll need to add some additional namespaces. Because we'll be storing our button, we'll need a Unity engine.ui. And because we'll be storing our text, we'll need tmpro. For our variables, I will declare a public button and name it conjure button. I'll make a public sprite renderer and name it renderer. I'll need a public text mesh pro UGUI. And I'll name that quantity text. And then lastly, I'll want a public item, which we haven't created yet, that will be called item. On our prefab, this will just store what item we're actually referencing. I don't want to see it in the inspector because all the other ones will be assigned by the inspector. So before this, I'll type hide in inspector. Before we assign these in the editor, however, let's create our item script. Back in Unity, in my scripts folder, I've made a scriptable objects folder. In here, I'm going to go to Create, C# script, and I'll name this item. And I'll double click to open this up in Visual Studio. Within our item scriptable object, we'll want to define different things about our item, things like its name, its image icon, how many of it the player has, and how many can be created per second. So we'll just declare a bunch of different variables here. So I'll start with a public string, which will be the name, then a public string ID, a public bool can conjure, because some of our items will craft, we'll do that in another video, but some will be conjurable and some will be craftable. Do a public sprite, which will be our icon, a public bool for is locked. To create a sense of progression in the game, some items will have to be unlocked as you play. Declare a public int here for quantity and a public int for per second. And this value will just be how many of these can be created per second if it's being conjured. Hit save. Then the last thing I want to do is just make it so that when I right click in my project file that I can add a scriptable object of type item, just to make it super quick. So I will make a create asset menu. For file name, I'll set it equal to new item. And for the menu name, I'll set it equal to scriptable object /item. Back in Unity, I've created a subfolder called items. Now when I right click in an open area in my project tab, I can go to create. Now there's this new area that says scriptable object and it has a type item. When I click it, I can give it a name and I get something in my inspector that shows all of the variables I created. We'll be making a kind of chemistry game, so my first item will be proton. In the inspector, I'll assign it the name proton. For ID, most of these I'll be giving a number that is their atomic number. Proton itself is an element. Because I want it to be the first thing that shows up, I'll just leave a 0 for it. So 1, 2, 3, because we have hundreds of elements, and then I'll just add an additional 0 here. Can conjure, I'll check this true. In my textures folder, I've uploaded a sprite sheet that has icons for some of my items. In here, I'll just drag and drop my sprite into the correct spot. At the start of the game, this item will be unlocked, so I'll leave is locked unchecked. For quantity, we'll start at 0, so I'll leave this like that. And per second, the minimum will be 1. I'll go ahead and do this for a few more items as well. Awesome, now we have all of the data ready so we can create our inventory icons. In order to be able to populate our inventory, I want to be able to get all of the items in our game. To do that, I'm going to create a new Utils script. So in my scripts folder, I have this folder called Utils. I'm going to go to create C#script and call this Utils. This class here won't have a mono behavior, so I'll delete that. It will be a public static class, which means we can access it from anywhere. Within this script, I won't need my update or start function, so I'll delete those, and I won't need system collections or system collections generic. In here, I want to declare a method that can be accessed from anywhere, so I will make a public static type array. That's what we'll return, and then we'll do get all instances of type T with no parameters, where T is a scriptable object. We will return resources load all of type T, and then our location, which we'll put in resources / scriptable objects / items. Then back in Unity, I want to click on my assets, right click, go to create, and make a new folder called resources. Then I'll take my scripts and I'll drag and drop that into my resources folder. Using resources like this isn't necessarily the best practice, but for a prototype, it's absolutely fine until we build out a more comprehensive solution. To help us in our game, I'd like to create an ItemManager script. This ItemManager script will contain crucial information that we can access from anywhere in the game. Within my scripts folder, I'll right click in an open area, go to create, and then click C#script. And I'll name this ItemManager. In order to make my ItemManager script accessible from anywhere, I'll need to make it a singleton. To do that, I'll make a public static ItemManager and name it instance. Then on awake, I'll set the instance equal to this, which is a reference to the current script. Since we're in our ItemManager, we won't be using this very much, but it'll come in handy a lot later. So we'll make a public item array and call it items. On awake, we'll set items equal to our utils dot get instances item. Just to show what's going on, I'll do a for each item in items. We'll do a debug log of item dot name. Within our project, I'll right click, go to create empty, and make a new manager. Then I'll go to add component and add our ItemManager script. Now when I playtest, I can see a debug log of all of the items we created in the console. However, right now they're in a random order. Instead, I'd like them to be ordered by the ID they've been given. So back in our script, we'll need a system.link. And in here, now you can call in items equal to items dot order by p. I'm going to do an equal greater than p dot id to array. Hit save on that. Now when we play test, the debug log shows everything in the correct order. Now that we have all of our items, we can start making our inventory buttons. I'm going to click on Canvas, go to Add Component, New Script, and make a new script called InventoryCreator. Then click Create and Add. In our InventoryCreator, I won't need a system collections generic namespace, but I will need a UnityEngine.ui. For our variables, we'll want a private game object named button prefab, a private transform, which will be our button container, and a private sprite, which is our lock icon. And we'll want to assign these in the inspector. So in front of these, I'll do serialize field for each. I'm going to start a new function called create inventory. In front of this, I'm going to make it an IEnumerator. The reason for doing this is that I want to call this a little bit into the game to just make sure that everything else in the game has had enough time to be created. So here I'll add a yield return new wait for end of frame. So this won't happen until a frame has passed. And then here we'll want to do a for each item in, and then here we're going to access our singleton, our ItemManager.instance, and there's where we're accessing this, what we talked about earlier, of items. So what this method is currently doing is it's waiting for the end of the frame, and then it's going to iterate through all of the items. But right now we're not calling it, so we'll want to do that in private void start. Because it's a coroutine, we'll want to call a start coroutine, and then we can put inside of this create inventory, then close off our method, and then a semicolon. In our for each loop, we'll want to make a local game object for our current instance, and we'll need to create it by using instantiate. We'll instantiate a button prefab, and we'll assign it to our location button container. To keep things clear in the inspector, I'll assign the instance name equal to our current item name. Within our inventory UI prefab, on our topmost game object, I'll assign the new component inventory item. Then I'll assign all our variables in the script here. Then hit save. Because we've assigned this script to the topmost game object of our prefab, we can create a local inventory item named inventory item and set it equal to instance.getComponent inventory item. This will get the script assigned to our topmost game object. Now we can assign all the data that's included in our item to our current inventory item. So we'll set our inventory item.item equal to our current item, and our inventory item.renderer.sprite equal to our item.icon. When we go back to our project and click on our canvas, we need to assign our button prefab and our button container. So I'll drag my prefab into this location, and within my canvas, I've created a panel with a grid layout group that will be the container for all my buttons. This grid layout group will make sure that everything gets spaced accordingly. I'll assign this as my button container in the inspector. Now when I click playtest, you can see that when I start the game, all of the items get instantiated as my inventory. Currently, everything has a conjure button and its inventory is set to 0, but we have all of our unique icons for each item. Back in our script, let's show a default icon if the item is locked. So we'll do an item is locked check, and we'll move this function to our else. So it'll only set the sprite to the icon if it's unlocked. If it's locked, we'll set it equal to our lock icon. Then back in our project, we just need to assign our lock icon in the inspector. Go to textures, navigate to my lock, which is just this question mark here. Now when we play test, you can see the helium and hydrogen, which are locked, show up as question marks. We also need to do a similar check for our conjure. Back in our script, we'll set our InventoryItem.conjure button .gameObject.setActive equal to our item can conjure. Now when we play test, you can only see the conjure button for scriptable objects where we've set the can conjure boolean. Now let's set our item quantities. Within our item inventory script, I'm going to be using a system collection, and I'm going to make a new enumerator called set quantity, which will yield return a new wait for end of frame. And after that's finished, we'll set our quantity text.text equal to our item.quantity to string. And then on enable, we'll want to call this. So we'll set a private void on enable, which is a mono behavior. And then we'll do a start coroutine set quantity. Now when we play test, you can see everything is set to 0 at the start. If I click conjure though, nothing happens. To get something to happen, we need to create functionality for our button when we create our inventory item. To do this, I'm going to create a new method called private void set button on click function, which will take in our button and the item. We'll take our button parameter, do an on click, add listener, and then we have to do a delegate here. And we'll create a new method called set conjure, and we'll set it equal to our item. So we need to make our set conjure method. We'll do a private void set conjure named item. Within this method, I want to set the current item that we're conjuring in our item manager. So within our item manager, I'll create a new public item named current item. Then to make things simple, I'll make a public void set current item that will take in an item that will set our current item equal to the item that we pass it. Now back in our InventoryCreator script, for my set conjure button, I'll call the ItemManager.instance.set current item equal to our item. Now we just need to call this method on our button. So within our create inventory, we'll do an if item can conjure, and we only want to do this if our item can be conjured. So within this, we'll call our set button on click function, which will pass in our button and our current item. Now when we play test and click any of our conjure buttons, you can see in our item manager the current item is being assigned. It's not currently doing anything, but we can see it's functioning properly. Now let's allow our current item to increment over time. In my item manager, I'm going to make a new private void update and declare a new private float timer. Every frame, I will add the amount of time that has passed between frames, and then if my timer is greater than or equal to 1, then we will increment current item. We'll have to make a method for this, and then we'll subtract 1 from our timer. This will just make it so that every second we are incrementing our items. For our increment current item, I'll make a public void named increment current item, which will pass in my current item quantity plus equals my current item per second. However, when I playtest, I get spammed with errors because I don't currently have a current item set. When I click an item, you can see those errors stop. Our number here isn't updating because we're not getting anything on it, but if I go to my item, you can see that in the inspector, it's showing that my proton is being incremented. First, let's fix our spamming null error. Let's make a private void start. And on start, we are going to create a local variable called current item name, which will be equal to a player prefs.get string called last craft. And if there's no string, then we'll just say we'll start on proton. Player prefs are great for saving data across sessions, so that's why we're using that here. Then we'll set our current item equal to a get item current item name. This function we haven't created yet. Our get item function will be private, and it will return an item. It will take in a string, which will be the item name. So what we want to do in this function is iterate through all of our items and try to find something that matches our item name. So I'll do a for each item in items if the item name, and then we'll do a to lower here just so that we have a commonality in case. Do that on both of these. Then we will return item. If this doesn't return, then we'll make a debug log error that says unable to get item of string. Then we'll pass in the item name and return null. Then at the very bottom, I'll make a private void mono behavior of on application quit that will set a string of last craft to the current item name to lower. So we get our string of last craft. If there's no value assigned to this, it'll be proton. So then we pass that string into our get item, and then our get item function returns the correct actual item for our string. Then when we exit our application, we'll set our last craft equal to whatever item we're currently crafting. Now when I playtest, you can see I don't get spammed with errors. And if I check my manager, you can see my current item is set to proton. If I was to click my neutron, and then exit my session, then reopen my session, you can see in manager, my current item is set to neutron. You might also notice that our items are being set, but only at the start. That's because in our item inventory script, we're only setting our quantity on enable. So let's fix that. To do that, I'm going to make a new C# script and call it EventManager. And I'll drag and drop this script on my manager game object. In our EventManager script, I'll want to be using a Unity engine, and then we'll also want a Unity engine dot events. This will be a singleton too, so I'll make a public static event manager called instance. Then on awake, I'll set instance equal to this. Delete my update method here because I won't need it. And then we'll also want a public Unity event that will take in an item and an int, and we'll call this inventory update event. Then we'll make a new method called inventory updated, which will receive an item and an int. Then in here, we'll do an inventory update event dot invoke item count. I see Unity events kind of like flags. We're going to call this inventory updated event every time something gets updated, which will allow certain things that are looking for that event to know that the inventory was updated. So back in our item manager, under our increment current item, we'll do an event manager instance dot inventory updated, which will put in our current item and current item quantity. This line here is what is alerting our inventory has been updated. Now in our inventory item, private void start event manager instance inventory update event, add listener, and then we're going to make a new function here that we're going to call process inventory update. Private void process inventory update that will again have to take in the same things, int count, and then we'll do this check here. If our current item is equal to the updated item type, then we'll set our quantity text equal to our count to string. And we also need to make sure to remove our listener. So I'll do a private void on destroy, and I'll copy this whole thing. Instead of add listener, I'll do remove listener. Now when we play test, you can see every frame, our current item, which currently is set to our neutron, is being incremented. If I select my electron, that gets incremented. If I select proton, that gets incremented. And there we go. That concludes this episode of creating an idle game in Unity. In the next episode, we'll go over creating various upgrade buttons. To be alerted when that video goes live and receive other game development and Unity tutorials just like this, hit subscribe. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.